What's going on, everybody? Jake here with Venture Visuals, and today I am stoked to be showing you guys 7 next level rotoscope effects that I use in so many of my videos to make them feel more creative. Today's tutorial is definitely a little bit more on the advanced side, so it will be helpful if you have already played around with some rotoscoping and gotten familiar with the rotobrush tool in After Effects. It's great to be back on the channel with you guys. I do want to let you know that I am open for music video edits, so if that sounds like something you would be interested in collabing with me, make sure to hit me up on Instagram and let me know your thoughts and ideas. Alright guys, so to start this tutorial, we are here in Premiere Pro, and on my timeline I have a music video pulled up, and I've actually created 7 markers above different clips in this timeline that would be perfect for adding some rotoscope effects to. What I recommend you guys do when you're picking shots to rotoscope in your timeline, you want to have pretty stable camera movement as well as objects that can clearly be identified from foreground and the background. Now, this footage was shot in 60 frames per second, which allows us then to slow motion it down and still have it be super crispy if we wanted it to. I always film in 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second when I'm shooting music videos because it enables me to have the capacity to slow motion those clips and have it look super crispy. However, I'm always going to be editing footage in a 24 frame per second timeline because it looks more cinematic. Now, because our frame rate from our original video footage and our sequence frame rate that we're editing in can be different from each other, when you try to rotoscope a clip without nesting it first, a lot of times what will happen when you bring it into After Effects, grab your roto brush and start rotoscoping, you'll get this error message here at the bottom that says frame rate mismatch. Now, this is basically After Effects recognizing that the frame rate of your sequence settings does not match the frame rate in which the footage was shot in. So that's why I like to nest my clips before bringing them into After Effects. Instead of trying to import that raw clip without nesting, now we have our nested clip and we can select replace with After Effects composition. What that does is it just locks in our frame rate from Premiere, so then now when we go to rotoscope, we don't have an error message that pops up and we can rotoscope our subject in 24 frames per second, which is our timeline. So now that we're here in After Effects, I'm actually just going to keep on rotoscoping my subject this way, and we're just going to just kind of fine tune it. Once you have traced out the very first frame of your subject, you can either hit 2 on your keyboard to move to the next frame, or you can just tap spacebar, and now After Effects is going to start trying to automatically rotoscope the rest of your frames. But you do want to make sure that you go back and make sure it does a good job when it's doing this. You can see right here, it's kind of dragging on some of the background, so I can just go back to those frames and eliminate those parts that aren't as smooth that the computer is just messing up on, and then hit spacebar again and let it continue to rotoscope my subject. So now that I'm at the end of this sequence and I've got my artist all traced out very clean, we're going to select the freeze button to now freeze our rotoscope. So now that we can clearly identify our rotoscope layer and our background layer, what I'm going to do is duplicate our rotoscope layer twice. So this one will be our original layer and these will be the clones that will sit behind our original layer. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is keyframe the position of both of those clone layers. So I'm going to shift click both those layers and hit P on my keyboard to pull up the position value. I'm going to set the very first keyframe there at the default value, scroll a bit farther down my timeline, and I'm going to start changing the values of the position for these other 2 clones behind our main artist so that we get something like this. So I'm actually going to move these keyframes in a little bit. We'll go about halfway here, and then I think towards the end we can have them go back to these default values. So I'm just going to copy paste each one of these default values here back at the end of our timeline, and now we are getting something like this. So you can see we just have these clone layers that kind of pop out from our center subject there. The next step into getting the collage effect that we want to end up with is adding in some paper animations, personally that I got off of creativeflowmarket.com, but you can also find paper animations on a bunch of different websites, but I really do think these ones are some of the best ones that I've ever seen. So you can see when I bring it into After Effects and blow it up, you're kind of now getting this papery texture above the footage. However, I only want it to impact the background, so I'm going to drag it above the background layer and keep it below all of my rotoscope layers. If you want to, you can play around with the blend mode of the paper layer to get slightly different textures, different looks. After making our background black and white, I'm going to select all of our rotoscope layers, right click them and select pre-compose so that we can place them all into one layer. And I'm actually going to throw a Lumetri color onto this layer. What I'm going to do from here, and this is personal preference, it's up to you, I'm going to increase the temperature all the way, increase the saturation all the way, and I'm going to start changing the tint to a deep red, right? So we get something like this, and this is starting to look really cool. I'm going to bring up the shadows a little bit so we get a little bit more detail, maybe increase the contrast. I always like putting red tinted rotoscopes on top of like a black and white background. I just think it looks really cool that way, and I'm starting to really enjoy how this is looking. So what I'm going to do from here is just close out of the Lumetri color. Now I'm just going to take some lightning effects that I downloaded from actionvfx.com and place these lightning overlays in the background of my footage. Let's just take this lightning effect video. We're going to blow it up for the size of our composition, and I'm going to bring this lightning below our rotoscope layer. I'm going to change the blend mode to screen, so now you can see the little lightning coming off of the background there. We're going to highlight all of our layers, right click on them, pre-compose them, and we're going to throw on an effect called posterize time. So let's just click and drag that posterize time now onto our main layer, and we're going to change the frame rate from 24 down to 12. This is just going to make our footage look a little bit more choppy, a little bit more stop motion like. I always like to throw a little sapphire flicker on top of these types of effects to make our footage kind of flicker a little bit as well. From here, what I'm going to do is come up to composition, add it to my render queue, render it as a lossless file. Then I'm just going to select render. So now I'm back in Premiere Pro, and all I'm going to do is navigate to where I saved that rendered file, and I'm going to drag that new rendered file above where our effect is in Premiere. And now you can see it's showing up in my preview, and I can watch this back, and it's going to look really cool. So that is a really dope effect. I call this kind of a stop motion collage style mixed media effect. This next rotoscope effect is this vertigo / dolly zoom effect that was made really popular in the movie Jaws. Now they do this effect in camera, but there's a way to kind of manipulate your footage and do it in After Effects. So let's just take this shot right here on my timeline. I'm going to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to nest the clip that I'm going to apply these rotoscopes to and import it into After Effects. Here in After Effects, I'm going to duplicate our layer with our top layer selected. I'm going to rotoscope so that I can get him separated from the background. Now that I have the artist traced out, I'm going to hop back into my composition. If I turn off the bottom layer, you can see the background turns off. So we have two separate layers here. We have our background layer and our roto layer. Let's go to the very first frame here. I'm going to select the drop down menu. We're going to make a keyframe for position and scale. We're going to drag those default values all the way to the end. Now here in the beginning, we're going to increase the scale, and we're going to move the position so that he's right about here, way more zoomed up into the frame that way. So as this clip progresses now, you'll see he will kind of zoom back out into his original position. For this background layer, we want it to start farther back and zoom up to the subject. So let's go into our background transform properties and keyframe position and scale. We're going to drag those default values to the end as well. At this very first frame, we're going to change the scale to make it a lot more zoomed out. Now I do have my roto layer turned off for this. You can see if I turn it on, you can see the two separate layers there. Now at this very first frame with our scale set at only about 65%, what we're going to do is come up to effects and presets, and we're going to type in an effect called motion tile. We're going to throw that onto our background layer, increase the output width and the output height, and we're also going to select mirror edges. This is going to kind of blend multiple backgrounds together. That way you're not seeing cut off edges of this background. It's kind of blending them all together. Now, a way to make this look a little bit less trippy and more authentic is going to be by adding a blur. So we're going to type in Gaussian blur, and we're going to throw that onto our background at this point as well. We're going to change the value here in the beginning of this Gaussian blur. I'm going to take it up quite a bit. Let's go pretty far. Let's go to like 130, and we're going to make a keyframe for that blurriness there in the beginning, and then all the way at the end, we're going to take the blurriness back down to 0. Now, if I want to see all the keyframes I've created, I just have to select the layer and hit U on my keyboard. And now we can see the blur, the position, and the scale, all of the values which we changed. Something else I also like to add in with this background is if I click on the background and hit T, it'll open my opacity, and we can kind of change the opacity as it zooms in as well. So we're going to take the opacity value at 100, put that at the end, and here in the beginning, we can make it a 10. I'm going to change the background from transparent to black by toggling our transparency grid. And now as this background zooms in, it slowly gets more visible, the blur goes away, and so on and so forth. Now you'll see it's not zooming in for whatever reason, so let's open up our scale values, and you can see that this final value did not zoom back into 100, so we're just going to change that value so it starts at 65 and zooms in to that value of 100, right? So now when I turn on my rotoscope layer on top of this and I go to the beginning, you'll see our rotoscope layer starts really high up and zooms back into the frame, and our background layer starts really far away and zooms up into the frame. So they're both zooming in different directions. So to kind of finish things off here, I'm going to play off the opacity change on the background a little bit, and I'm going to throw a deep glow onto our rotoscope layer. I'm going to keep the values at the defaults there in the beginning, and then as our shot moves through, I'm going to change the exposure all the way at the end back down to 0, so it's the original look of the artist. What I like to do is add a little flicker onto these, so I'm going to pre-compose both these layers and add a S flicker, part of the Sapphire suite, onto this as well, just to kind of give it that final touch. And then I'm just going to render it out as a lossless file and pull it back into Premiere like we did the first example. This next effect is so dope, and it's rotoscoping with the content aware fill effect in After Effects. In this shot here, we have the artist in the middle of our clip. What I'm going to do now is just duplicate this. I'm going to rotoscope the artist. Now that our rotoscope is done tracing out the artist, what I'm going to do is jump into our composition and duplicate that rotoscope layer. Now on this bottom layer, I'm actually going to hop back into our roto brush, and I'm going to unfreeze this layer, and I'm going to invert the foreground and background of this clip. So now you can see it's going to rotoscope everything but the artist. So this is going to be left alone here in the middle. It's going to highlight and keep everything around our subject now that I've clicked on invert. So from here, I'm going to hit freeze again, and I'm going to let this layer now freeze. Now that our new layer has been traced, let's hop back into composition, and let's just look at these layers one by one. So here on the top, we have our artist layer. Here in the middle, we have everything but the artist traced. And then on the bottom, we have our original shot. So with our middle layer turned on, we're going to navigate to where it says Content Aware Fill in After Effects, and we're just going to select Generate Fill Layer. This is going to analyze where there is nothing in our footage, and it's going to generate via artificial intelligence a background for this area where the artist is sitting in this shot. So you'll see more what I mean here after it gets done analyzing. So now that it's done generating a fill layer, you can see it's totally filled in all the empty space where our artist was sitting in this shot. So this is really cool because now what we can do is drag this fill layer below our rotoscope layer with the artist on it. You can have him fall from the sky. We can turn the scale up a little bit so he's a little bit bigger, like that. So now when he falls in, he's gonna kind of shrink down and land on that spot on the bench. Pretty cool. And then we can also just easy ease in the secondary keyframes. Another thing that I recommend doing is turning on your motion blur for this layer so he's a little bit blurry as he falls in there. And now altogether we got something like this where he just falls in from the sky. Boom. We can pre-compose all of these layers together, and then right before he lands on his spot, we're going to hit Command-Shift-D to separate it. I'm going to open up Window, Extensions, Shake Sauce, which is one of my favorite plugins to use if you've been following my channel. And we're just going to pick a preset from Shake Sauce here to give us some impact. So let's try the, where is it? Vertical hit mega with flash. So it impacts the screen as he lands on his spot. So let's just double click on that. And you can see all together, it looks really clean. You know, we could add a little more movement to this, zoom out the camera as this is all happening. You know, you can get really creative with this type of stuff. This next effect is basically just a clone fill effect. I've actually broken this down in some of my other videos, but it's one of my favorite rotoscope effects. I definitely wanted to touch on it here today. So here in After Effects, what I'm going to do is duplicate my first original layer. We're going to rotoscope the artist in this shot. Now that I've rotoscoped the artist, we're just going to freeze that layer. Now that our rotoscope layer is frozen, we can hop back into our composition. Again, if you want to see the difference, our top layer there is the rotoscope, our bottom layer is the background. Now what I'm going to do is actually take some of these fire embers from the Fire Effects pack that you can download on cinepacks.com. Make sure to leave a link to this pack down below. And I'm going to import these embers into After Effects. Now what I'm going to do is place the embers beneath our rotoscope layer here. So you can see our rotoscope layer there at the top of the sequence. I'm going to actually shrink the fire embers a little bit, move them a little bit closer together behind our rotoscope layer. And now what I'm going to do is toggle my switches and modes, and I'm going to change the track matte from the embers to the nested sequence 97, which is our clone layer. So now you can see through our clone layer, we can now see all the embers coming through, and you're not seeing the artist anymore. Now what I'm going to do is actually duplicate our rotoscope layer. I'm going to turn it back on so we can see the artist, and I'm going to keyframe the artist so that he moves out of the way so that we can see these embers coming through. So I'm going to make a default keyframe there at about 17 frames in, and then we'll just slide him this way to the right where he'll remain for a couple seconds, and then we'll make a keyframe there, and then at the end he'll slide back into position. So all I did was change a few position keyframes. Let's just easy out some of these and then ease in some of the others. And then let's make sure that we turn motion blur on. So now after it's rendered, you can see exactly what it's doing here. It looks freaking awesome. I love how you can play around with the different backgrounds and fill effects with your rotoscope layers. And I think it's just an easy way to get more creative. For this next example, we're going to be using a free plugin called the Saber plugin to give us this super unique glowing outline effect around whatever we decide to trace out. Now for this example, I am going to trace out the artist in the foreground of this shot, and then we are going to apply the Saber plugin to give us that glowing edge outline. Now that I have the artist traced out, I'm going to freeze the outline. And now that I have frozen our rotoscope, I'm just going to hop back into our composition. I'm going to hide our background layer, and I'm actually going to turn our transparency grid on. Now what I'm going to do is come up to composition, add to render queue, and I'm going to select the option lossless with alpha. This is going to render the composition that we were just rotoscoping with a transparent background. So back in the timeline, I'm going to click and drag the file that we just rendered onto our sequence here, and I'm actually going to hide the background. Now with this new clip selected, what we're going to do is come up to layer and select auto trace, and we're going to select work area. You also want to check apply to new layer, and then we'll hit OK. This will auto trace the outline of our layer, and you'll notice sometimes there's a few little stragglers. You just click on some of those or highlight. You can just delete some of these points that are just a little bit outside of our radius. We don't want these traced. We just want the outline of the artist. So that looks good to me. And now what we can do is come up to effects and presets. I'm going to type in Saber, and I'm going to throw a Saber plugin onto our auto trace layer. Now what I'm going to do is drop down our customized core, change it from Saber to layer mask, and then we're going to drop down our render settings, and instead of composite settings on black, we're going to change that to transparent, and now you can see the effect that we're starting to get. So I'm actually going to drop the auto trace layer below the layer that we have rendered, and we can also switch on the background layer at this point. So now you're really getting the full effect. And then with the Saber plugin open, we can actually just cycle through these different looks looks and styles and just pick one that looks really cool. Like we can try haze. That's a really nice one. It's a little bit more subtle. And now once you have a preset that looks good and you like how it's turning out, what you can do is just hit composition, add render queue, and render this back into Premiere. For this next rotoscope effect, we're going to be using the Sapphire Edge Rays effect, which is a part of the Sapphire suite through Boris Effects. It's a paid suite of plugins that I use every single day, and it comes with hundreds of different options and presets to really help speed up your workflow. So the first thing I'm going to do, and what I think works best with this type of effect, is using this effect on eyes or sunglasses, or maybe the headlights of cars, anything that you can see like a beam of light coming out of. So that's why I'm using the sunglasses in this example. Now that I have the sunglasses rotoscoped, I'm just going to freeze it. Once that's finished, I'm going to hop back here into my composition, turn my layers on and off so you can see the sunglasses alone and then with the background. And now I'm going to search up edge rays. And I'm just going to throw that onto our sunglasses layer. I'm going to change the center point here to be pretty much spot on right behind the sunglasses there. And then we're going to change the ray color to a red, and we can start to play around with the different styles that we want to get. So I think that's just a little bit too deep here. Let's blur the rays a little bit, and we're going to kind of have it come in gradually as well. Let's just start it here in the beginning. Let's turn the ray brightness down to 0, and then towards the middle of this clip, have the ray brightness go way up, and then at the very end of the clip, go back down to 0. And then I'll hit U to pull up my keyframe properties. And now what we're gonna do is just start keyframing the center value. So it's gonna start there right behind the sunglasses. So we're just gonna make a keyframe under center X and Y. And then towards the middle, we're going to just bring this down kind of behind the sunglasses here. So let's let that render. Cool. And bring it up just a hair. That looks good. And then at the end, it doesn't really move too much at the end. We won't move the center point around too much. And then like I said before, if you need to pull up your keyframes, just hit U on your layer. One thing I do want to do is make the rays a little bit longer. So that will be ray length right here, which we can start at the default here in the beginning. And then at the middle point, we can turn up the ray length, almost like he's scanning the room with his sunglasses, and then back down to 0 here at the end. Now this does look cool with the red, but maybe something a little bit more practical would be to maybe match some of this lighting here in the background, which looks a little bit more like somewhat of a beige yellow, something like that. That looks pretty cool to me. And then what you can do is throw on the Sapphire Flicker, which again is something that I just kind of throw around quite a bit when I'm doing special effects like this, and throw that onto that layer as well. So it flickers a little bit. And now we have this really cool effect where his sunglasses have the edge ray of light coming off of it. I think it looks so dope. Again, super creative, super fun, and just another way to kind of elevate the more static, more basic looking shots. All right, guys, for this last effect, we are going to be using a plugin from the Boris Effects suite, Continuum. Now, this is a really cool suite. Comes with a lot of plugins similar to the Sapphire suite, but the first thing I'm going to do is rotoscope the artist. As you already know, you got to rotoscope first, and then we're going to start applying the effect. All right, now that we have the artist rotoscoped, we're gonna hit freeze. Now that that's finished, I'm going to come back here to composition, and you can see if I hide our layers, we have our rotoscope layer, and then we have our background layer. So I'm actually gonna come up to effects and presets and type in video glitch. Now this is BCC video glitch, and it's a part of the Continuum suite. We're going to click and drag that onto the background. And that's basically going to add some glitch effects to our background. Now the great thing about the Boris Effects Sapphire suite and Continuum suite is that all these plugins have different presets, so we can quickly cycle through different glitch looks to find, a glitch that works really well for us. Maybe we want, a heavier glitch. Maybe we want something that's like this, a little bit more subtle. So it's really easy to just kind of flip through these options and find a style that works for your clip. This one looks pretty cool. It's a little bit blocky, but it's not doing a whole lot with the color. It's not messing with the color too much. So let's just give this one a shot and see what it looks like. So there you go. You can see it just kind of adds a little bit of that finer detail to the edit. It just makes it a little bit more eye-catchy. The cool thing about it is you can save the preset once you're finished with it by coming under Effects and Presets. We can select this little page button right here that says Create New Animation Preset, and then we can save this as glitch background, and I already have one saved, so we'll call this one glitch background 2 and save it. And then anytime in the future that I want to throw on this same effect to other clips, all I have to do is come under animation presets, user presets, and then I can just click and drag our glitch background 2 effect on any other clip. So it makes it really quick and easy then for you to create your own effects, tweak them to your liking using these plugins, and then save those exact values and those exact presets in your After Effects for future use. I hope you guys are able to take away some creative ideas to try on your next edit from today's video. If you did, make sure to let me know down below in the comments, and always send me your work on Instagram if you end up using some of these ideas in your next edit. I always love seeing the work you guys do, and the amount of growth from this community has just been tremendous. So I'm very excited to hear from you guys on Instagram. And if you're a video editor who's maybe just getting started, or maybe not sure where to take your next project, definitely recommend checking out my free pack on venturvisuals.com. It's got some overlays, some title templates, some transition presets, and more for you to get started on your next edit, make things a little bit more creative, and move through your edit a little bit faster that way. So if you're interested in downloading some free stuff, make sure to check out my website, link down below in the description. And as always, I really appreciate everybody for tuning in on another great video. I'm very excited to keep going this year and pump out some more videos, share my creative workflows with you guys, and vice versa. So I appreciate everybody who's made it to the end of the video and continues to visit the channel. I'm very grateful for you guys. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm Jake Venner. Peace out.